One could go on. So the deaths of despair actually are more than even those figures encompass, because they only look at suicides and overdoses and so on. What about all the diseases that are fostered by stress? That's why the subtitle of the book is Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. This culture is toxic in the sense that it poisons people, poisons them not just physically through all the environmental degradation and you know, I don't know, all the stuff that's in the food and the water supply and the air and all that. It toxifies people's sense of themselves.
You've spoken about this. The deaths of despair in the U.S. have more than doubled over 2 decades. And you can see right here, it's almost like a hockey stick.
Yeah.
It rises, and then 2014, it really just takes off. Why do you think deaths of despair in America are on the rise that way?
Yeah, well, that has to do with to what extent the society meets or does not meet human needs. As I point out in the book, The Myth of Normal, human beings have certain needs. Children have certain needs. And adults have certain needs. Now, in pertaining to your question, one of the needs of adults is a sense of belonging and meaning and purpose. Now, beginning with Reaganomics and Thatcheronomics, and then followed by Clintonomics and Obama economics, the neoliberal domain, communities have been eroded, jobs have been exported, and American males who derived their sense of meaning from the work that they did, the pride in the creation, even if they worked in these factories and so on, but it gave them a sense of purpose and belonging and communality, and it fed a sense of self-respect that I can feed and support and lead my family. Now, you hollow out the industrial heart of America, what do you get? People now who have lost their sense of belonging and purpose and meaning. And that leads to despair. And so they turn to addictions to soothe that despair. Addictions are not a disease you inherit, it's a response to emotional pain and suffering. And so that in the United States, I don't know how many American knows this. Now, last year, the number of overdose deaths went down for a number of reasons, which is good. But for the last several years now, every year, more than twice as Americans die just of overdoses. Every year, more than double the number of Americans died of overdoses than died in the American wars in Iraq, Vietnam, and Afghan were put together every year. Well, what is that all about? Then not to mention the physical consequences of drinking, liver disease, the suicides, the stress-imposed diseases like diabetes. One could go on. So the deaths of despair actually are more than even those figures encompass, because they only look at suicides and overdoses and so on. What about all the diseases that are fostered by stress? That's why the subtitle of the book is Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. This culture is toxic in the sense that it poisons people, poisons them not just physically through all the environmental degradation and you know, I don't know, all the stuff that's in the food and the water supply and the air and all that. It toxifies people's sense of themselves. So that the costs are enormous. And something like 70% of American adults are on at least one medication, and 40% are on 2 or more. The vast
it's that many.
Yeah, it's that many. And not to mention all the psychiatric diagnoses. The question we have to ask is this just like a personal failure or a personal genetic misfortune? No, it isn't. It's the impact of living in a highly stressful and emotionally toxic culture.
Well, you seem, your theories of trauma, I don't want to assume, it seems like you're coming off kind of an evolutionary psychology base in your theory of the mind, that modern civilization forces a kind of repression in order to conform to it. Am I reading that right?
Well, I'm not sure I would identify myself with evolutionary psychologists, because there's a lot they say I totally disagree with. I don't think they understand people that well at all, because they think it's all about survival,
Right.
which it isn't, by the way. It's all about connection, actually. And but what is true is that civilization, going back thousands of years. Well, let me step back a bit. If you look at human beings, we've been on the earth for millions of years. Hominins, human ancestors, our own species, Homo sapiens, we've been on the earth for 200,000 years. Now, until 15,000 years ago, everywhere, and in many places until much more recently, excuse me, we lived out in nature, in small band hunter-gatherer groups,
Right.
in communal groups,
Mm-hmm.
where children were cared for by the adults the whole day and by the whole community. There was a real sense of belonging. Evolutionary psychologists think that ancient humans lived with all this stress and fear because of saber-toothed tiger. Nonsense. They actually lived with much more security than we have, because they had each other, they had connection. And the essence of safety is not the absence of threat, but the presence of connection. And what civilization over thousands of years, and it's heightened in our civilization, has created loss of connection over and over and over and over again, to the point that loneliness is an epidemic now.
Right.
And let me tell you about loneliness. Loneliness is as much of a risk factor for disease and early health as smoking 20 cigarettes a day.
Yeah.
And this is not medically disputed. So I am coming from a point of view that we evolved to live in a certain kind of set of relationships with nature and with each other and ourselves, and we've lost the plot. That's true.
Right.
That's true.
So as a married guy, I could smoke 10 cigarettes a day and I'm good? Is that what you're saying? I knew that. I would have
Why don't you try it and let us
been
know?
doing it all wrong. Yeah.
But try it and let us know how it goes.
No, it's really, can I just ask one very
But let me tell you something astonishing. I don't know how much of the meanderings of my ADD mind you're ready for, but let me tell you something interesting.
We're ready.
There was a British surgeon in the 1960s, a thoracic surgeon, who operated on lung cancer patients. And of course, smoking is a major risk factor for lung cancer, but it doesn't cause it. It doesn't cause it, because 95% of lung cancer patients are smokers, but only 15% of smokers develop lung cancer. So if smoking caused lung cancer, if A caused B, then every time you saw A, you should see B, but you don't. So smoking, yes, is a major risk factor, and the cigarette companies are mass murderers in a way that they suppressed the information about it or denied it. But this guy found that people who smoked and suppressed their emotions are the ones who develop lung cancer. And the more you suppressed your emotions, which is a trauma effect, the less cigarette it took to trigger the lung cancer. In other words, there's a huge relationship between how people are programmed to deal with their emotions and their immune system. So yes, lung cancer is the major risk, but it's not the only one. In other words, what I'm saying is you can't separate the mind from the body. And when it comes to emotional repression, where does that develop? You've never met, your 10-month-old infant does not repress their emotions, I guarantee you.
Right.
Nobody's born like that. We're born expecting stuff. What happens is, in the course of parenting in this culture, children learn to suppress themselves in order to be acceptable. And that has a huge impact on their physiological health and their mental health. I don't know if I pontificated long enough.
No, you mentioned loneliness. This is something that we've observed. Me and Keaton both come from a theater background.
Yeah.
So we are used to looking at the patterns of how people buy tickets. And when we were doing theater, which was earlier in the timeline of social media and the internet, I think that's a factor. You almost never saw a single ticket sold. It was almost always groups of at least 2, 3, 4, 10, right? When we recently did a live show, it's mostly single tickets. And that represents a big shift in society. Why do you think that is, and what can we do to fix it? Because it seems like that is a big part of the loneliness epidemic. I mean, we can see it in the fact that you have so many solo people going to a show like that.
It's very simple. People are ashamed to go to your shows.
Right, well, yeah.
How come it took me to figure that one
out? We were hypothesizing grand theory.
Yeah.
You know what we didn't do? We didn't hold up the mirror.
We didn't hold up the mirror. Yeah, we didn't think maybe it's I got it. It's us.
Well,
that's it.
That's a very interesting statistic you just brought up. I wonder if it's also true for other forms of theater. Or I don't want to speculate.
Well, I know nightclub owners and everyone I talk to in that business, they're getting by on event rentals and film shoot rentals because people don't go out like they did.
Yeah. Well, so look, the loneliness thing. Here's the point. We're wired for connection. And we're literally neurophysiologically, evolutionally wired for connection. The circuits in our brain dedicated to connection. But what happens if the context where those connections can develop and those circuits can be elaborated is missing? So again, the evolutionary context used to be the group, the clan, the tribe, the community, the family. This society has pretty much eroded all that. And a lot of parents are very stressed. It's not that they don't love their kids. It's not that they're not doing their best, but they're doing their best in a very toxic environment. And so people's sense of connection doesn't develop. What develops is a fear of others and a fear of sharing oneself vulnerably. And so the vulnerability that's involved in connection becomes very scary. So this society generates loneliness. And not to mention, look, you live in XY city in the States, and then the corporation that you work for all of a sudden shuts down the company. Now you have to move to ZW city, and you have to give up all your connections that you had. And this is repeated. There's so many factors in this culture that foster loneliness. And then, so I'm not surprised by what you described. Also, I don't know, isn't comedy a rather vulnerable what's the word I'm looking for?
Medium, art form.
Medium, yeah. That's what I meant to say. It's a vulnerable medium. I mean, what we laugh at, and often behind comedy, there's a lot of grief.
Yeah.
That's my sense. Those are very vulnerable states. So you have to be very open to sharing that, you know. I mean, you know, you can do comedy by pratfalls and, you know, physical comedy. That's okay. But a lot of comedy is actually, it goes very deep into the human psyche.
Come see us live. Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, Dublin, London, Liverpool, Birmingham. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.